Welcome to the Translational Addiction Podcast, where we decode the innovative research from the Loftybohr Lab at UC Irvine, dedicated to translational addiction studies and developing effective treatments. Today, Ishva and I are joined by Dr. Barbara Schillo, the Chief Research Officer at the Truth Initiative's Schroeder Institute, where she leads research on tobacco control, nicotine use, and public health policy. A nationally recognized leader in the field, she has spent decades advancing evidence-based tobacco control initiatives and translating research into impactful policy and practice. Today, we're excited to welcome Dr. Schillo to discuss her work and the evolving landscape of nicotine. So let's dive in.
I just want to start by saying thank you for coming onto this podcast, for giving us your time. We're all very excited to learn about everything that you have to tell us today and to talk about, scientific integrity and the social culture regarding nicotine use. And so just to introduce myself, I'm Ishva. I'm a third year now undergraduate student at UCI. I am a business and biology major, and pass it off to Arshia to introduce herself.
Yeah, I'm Arshia. I'm currently a second year undergraduate student at UC Irvine, and I am studying biomedical engineering. Can you start by introducing yourself really quick and just tell us a little bit more about your career journey so far? Like what led you to the Truth Initiative, and how has that transition been in regards to where you were before and where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to join you today on your podcast and talk about this timely and very important issue as it impacts young people and really, everybody in our communities. So I'm Dr. Barbara Schillo. I'm the Chief Research Officer at Truth Initiative's Schroeder Institute. I lead our research efforts around preventing youth and young adult nicotine addiction, around understanding emerging products and their marketing. The marketing piece is especially important, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I also lead efforts around research on assessing tobacco and regulatory impacts. So looking at what happens when a policy passes, when a regulation passes. We evaluate our media campaigns. So we've done national media campaigns. Truth has for a very, very long time. And my team is involved in assessing the impacts of those campaigns. And finally, we do research that expands the evidence base on cessation support for quitting. And we're going to talk about quitting today. So I've spent my career at the intersection of research, public health, and policy. I'm really a policy researcher. It's my passion. Of course, I see a much broader portfolio than that. But what I love about working at Truth is that we have the ability to do quick research, quick but good research, and then translate those findings into policy, practice, regulation. And that's what's always been important to me as a social scientist and somebody working in public health. Coming to Truth was an opportunity 8 years ago when I came to DC to address one of the most urgent public health issues facing young people today, which is nicotine addiction in a landscape that is very, very rapidly changing. So that's been important for my work. I worked prior to coming to Truth for about 18 years. I ran our research and quitting programs at Clearway, Minnesota, which was a state level program, kind of a state version of Truth, if you will. And so really having the opportunity to come to the national stage was very important for me. At Truth. Our vision at Truth Initiative is a future free from lifelong addiction. And we know that that means preventing young people from ever starting to use a tobacco or a nicotine product, helping people quit. It also means holding the tobacco industry accountable. And we'll talk about the industry a little bit, and making sure that public health really keeps up with the new products, the new marketing, and the cultural trends that are sort of surrounding these new and emerging products. So, I think what you all probably know from your lived experience and your work is that one of the biggest obstacles we face right now is the product market is changing so rapidly, and tobacco and nicotine seems to be reemerging in a way that in culture, in ways that can make it seem more normal, accessible, harmless, even aspirational. So that's a little bit about my journey and where I'm at. I really love working at Truth Initiative and in the field of public health and tobacco control specifically, and work with a very, very talented team, research scientists, research associates, and others in other complementary expert fields. So.
Yeah, that's it's a very noble work that you do to push to help with the culture around nicotine. And to take it to a national level is amazing, to be able to impact such a large community. And so I know you mentioned this a little bit, but how the media shapes nicotine to make it seem more trendy, more fashionable. And so I know recent pieces in The Cut and the New York Times have framed smoking and nicotine as being back. And so what are the implications of this, and how does this actually impact students, young adults, the community?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. I'm so glad you asked it, because this is really central to where we are at right now in thinking about youth and young people and nicotine and addiction. But I actually want to start off by first acknowledging the tremendous success that we've had in tobacco control in bringing smoking rates, combustible tobacco use, down to historic lows. And so, I don't want to gloss over that. And then I'm going to jump to the question and kind of where we're at today. But, our data tell us that youth rates are below 2%. These are smoking rates, combustible tobacco use rates. According to the latest National Youth Tobacco Survey, rates among adults just dip below 10%. And that's just incredibly historic and an incredible public health accomplishment. And so we should stop and take credit for that. But this success can hide the fact that smoking is still the number one preventable cause of disease and death in the United States. And now we have the challenge of these newer nicotine products emerging. And so our work is not done. So we often get asked, folks from the media give Megan and her team a call and say, do we have evidence that combustible use is up? Smoking cigarettes is up among youth and young adults. And the data don't tell us that yet. Although I will tell you that my colleagues and I and those in other organizations are keeping very careful watch over these data to see any signals that might be happening. But what we do see, and this is increasing and concerning trends towards what we call poly-use or dual use of cigarettes. And so we know today many young people initiated with e-cigarettes. They were never smokers, never used a combustible, but they've used e-cigarettes. Many are dealing with addiction and dependence. And so we're seeing increased use of cigarettes. So primarily e-cigarette users, but they use the occasional cigarette. I don't know if you've seen, I think online, drunk cigarettes don't count. The idea that occasionally if you're with friends and they're using combustible cigarettes, let's give it a try. And so that is very concerning. We're also seeing increased use of the oral nicotine pouches in combination with e-cigarettes. And so it's this dual use that's concerning. So now back to the question. Yes, the framing of smoking as back, it does appear to be part of a larger trend of the media glamorizing, if you will, or over-representing the social acceptability and prominence of tobacco in society. In fact, our own research, where we look at and code images of tobacco in popular culture, in films, in streaming shows that it's incredibly prevalent. If you sort of gave your estimate of how popular and common, smoking and vaping are based on what you see in the media, you would greatly overestimate where the prevalence estimates are. In fact, 8 of the 10 films for the Oscar categories last year, Best Picture Oscar categories, depicted tobacco imagery. And we see it so heavily in the most popular streaming platforms. And so this matters because we know from our research and the research of others that exposure to this imagery is correlated with initiation. So it decreases the risk of perception, it can normalize it, and ultimately it can influence and impact behavior. So, again, I think that, this idea of normalizing nicotine as a lifestyle choice, an aesthetic, a form of self-expression, it doesn't do right to the current generation, because this is a highly addictive substance with real health consequences. And so, it can really obscure the fact that nicotine is difficult to quit. And nicotine addiction can affect stress, anxiety, mood, and ultimately long-term well-being. And so what we worry about is that, the risk of renormalization is happening. And so that's why opportunities to talk with you all in this, especially this nice podcast long form, where I don't have to get my answers down to 30 seconds, is really important. I think it's also important to think about the products themselves, the way that they're packaged. Vapes, pouches, and other flavored products are often packaged with, colors and packaging that make them feel more safe or more modern. And so it's really important that we all talk about the incredible levels of nicotine in these products and what that means for young people that are using or experimenting with these products. So does that sort of, reflect what your experiences are on campus and what you see among some of your peer groups or their friends as of current?
I think you do bring up really good points because, like you said, combustibles, we don't really see people smoking around us, but especially on like college campuses. I know I've seen people with like nicotine pouches or like e-cigarettes, and it's definitely more of a common sight, especially among, I think, our age group. Using e-cigarettes and stuff like that instead of using combustibles. But I did want to track back to a point that you had made earlier. I was looking through some of the research articles that the Truth Initiative has put out, and one of them said that out of the top TV shows for ages 15 to 24, 7 out of 15 of them featured tobacco. And I just thought, reading that, I thought it was a crazy statistic because that's almost 50% of TV shows that I've probably watched on a regular basis that have normalized tobacco use. And I think for me, I've heard, tobacco's bad, you can get addicted to nicotine, but I never realized how much of it is actually depicted in media.
Yeah, our work of coding, capturing, and then sharing, generating research and sharing that on tobacco imagery and popular culture has been really important. And, it's not just about producing that research, but then it's about taking that information and sharing it with the streaming platforms so that they know, which of their shows index super high in terms of tobacco imagery. It's about sharing it with other, concerned constituents and potentially regulators to think about, ways to, address this and try to reverse this over portrayal of, this normalization of tobacco on screens. And so what we do is we actually ask a sample of 15 to 24-year-olds, what are their most popular streaming platforms? And then we ask interns to watch very carefully and code instances. And we're able to really identify sort of the top offenders, if you will, and sort of what that means. Because, of course, as you all know, you've grown up with a TV, an environment that's much different than, many of us grew up with, in that, it's accessible content. It might be on one streaming platform today, it might be on another the next, and that it's not just there to watch when it first comes out. A lot of people will binge watch old episodes. And so it's definitely an area for us to focus on and continue to raise attention around.
Absolutely. I think it's a very unique research angle. So just, I think you mentioned how exposure has a direct correlation to initiation. So in your opinion, what responsibility do media outlets have to avoid romanticizing a highly addictive product like nicotine?
Well, we think they have a big responsibility. And I think that there's folks out in the world, this has been an issue that the National Attorney General's Association is interested in. And so, we've explored different ways to remediate or address or inform. But it's not easy. These are these are media companies that are looking to, turn a profit. But, I don't know if you've had this experience, but you've watched a show. Probably I have because I'm so in it. But I'll watch a show and I'm like, really? they had to make that person smoke or this group smoke, and now, of course, it's, we're increasingly seeing vapes as well. So, it'll be something that we continue to raise awareness around moving forward. And hopefully prompt some action, because we do believe that, content creators, be they social influencers or media companies, do have a responsibility.
I know we've been talking a little bit about like nicotine and tobacco, but I was wondering if there's a big separation between the two. How does marketing make someone think that nicotine is different from tobacco, and why that separation is important?
Yeah, that's a great question. We just used to use nicotine or tobacco. I'm sorry, we used to talk about tobacco, and now we talk about tobacco and nicotine together, because there are products that are made from synthetic nicotine, which which has the same chemical compound, is just as addictive as plant-derived nicotine, but doesn't contain the leaf. And so, and when you see these products like the oral nicotine pouches, which, Zyn, Velo, and On are sort of the most popular brands, they don't look anything like, a cigarette or a pack of smokeless tobacco or pipe tobacco or a little cigar. And so, they are different in some ways, but really at the end of the day, when we talk about nicotine and the impact that that has on the developing brain, it isn't so separate. And so, I think where we're concerned is that, we in the past, we've seen sort of the prototypes of smokers and the marketing efforts around combustible cigarettes that looked much different than marketing campaigns these days. And that really started with Juul, where they really had a very youth-centric, youth-focused campaign, which, they've since, in some respects paid the price, because states have sued for some of the damages from many, many young people becoming addicted and not being aware of those risks. And so now we see that really continuing today, right, in terms of the promotion of oral nicotine products, the promotion of vapes. And so now it's sort of a young, attractive, it could be the tech boys, tech brothers, the Game Boys. We see, if you look at Zyn in particular, there's a whole meme culture out there, the Zyn influencers. And so it can, look and feel different. These products can look and feel different. But at the end of the day, nicotine, especially for young people with the developing brain, is harmful. We know that it has impacts on memory and cognition and learning and focus, and ultimately can prime the brain for addictions to other substances. And so, it's smokeless. These newer products are generally smokeless, but that doesn't mean that they're, smoke-free doesn't mean risk-free. And what we're trying to do is help young people understand the risks of getting addicted. And what we're starting to see too, because we serve a lot of young people that come to our quitting programs, and I want to say more about those, is that they'll talk about, well, I started with a vape a long time ago, maybe. I didn't even know it had nicotine in it. Now young people are more aware that there's nicotine in e-cigarettes, if you will. But I quickly got addicted. We've heard young people talk about, well, I got addicted because I could vape anywhere, anytime. So then I actually tried combustibles because there was more rules about where I could smoke a cigarette or not smoke a cigarette. Or we've heard, I switched from vapes to oral nicotine products, the pouches. And now we have young people that are contacting our quit programs that also want to quit the pouches, and be free from this tie to nicotine. I think young people really understand what it means to be addicted to nicotine. Young people that come to our programs, I'm just going to read a couple of quotes because they're so good. So young people enrolled in our digital quit tobacco program have described heavy chains pulling you back no matter what you're doing, trying to climb a slippery mountain that keeps getting bigger, or it's a cold, dark room with no windows, no doors, you're trapped and can't escape. Those are big, big statements that really kind of get at the heart of that lived experience for young people. And it also shows, and we know this from our experiences, that many young people that are addicted want to quit. I think that was a misconception in the past. Young people, they're not going to be interested in quitting until they've established, a career using tobacco or nicotine. And that simply isn't the case. And so it's important to go back to your question, to acknowledge the differences, but just a lot of similarities in terms of, at the end of the day, nicotine is nicotine.
Do you think that young people are more aware of the fact that they are being influenced to get nicotine, and then once they are addicted, they're more aware that they need to get out of the situation compared to adults?
Yeah, that's really a good question. And I don't know if I've got sort of a data point to answer that straight on. Let me just provide some response to that, because that's a really good question. I think that young people always have a lot of awareness, and they historically have understood how they have been manipulated by the tobacco industry. In days back, it was about initiating with cigarettes, and a lot of Truth's early prevention campaigns were around helping people understand how the industry knew the facts and still worked to get young people addicted. So you may be, I don't know if you're too young for this, but one of our historic prevention campaigns was called Body Bags, and then it just, really, if you haven't, you can look it up. I haven't seen it, but it's a really good illustration of, raising awareness around what the tobacco industry is doing. We're still trying to do that today. The tobacco industry hasn't gone away. Each of the major tobacco industries and the companies in the U.S. have at least one product, e-cigarette product, and I think they're on their way towards, being similarly in that space for oral nicotine pouches. And so, I think that, again, as I mentioned, I think when e-cigarettes first came out, they're sort of the earlier days, the Juul phenomenon. I think there was less awareness of nicotine. I think there's more awareness now. But if you look at how this is being promoted as sort of clean nicotine, that it's just like a cup of coffee, there's no accident here. The industry has had a long history of really, trying to downplay the harms of nicotine, and trying to normalize it. They continue through today, and that might be something that young people are less aware of. And that's why opportunities to talk to you all and get the word out about it is so important. The other thing that is really important is to help young people understand the levels of nicotine in these products. They are very, very high in many instances. And so we have a sort of a seminal paper that we often refer to. It's called Bigger, Stronger, Cheaper. And it looked at the rise of the disposable e-cigarettes, which really kind of hit the market first in 2020. There was some federal guidance which limited some of the more traditional e-cigarettes, but had this big loophole that people could drive right through for disposables. And those just really hit the market. And I'm going to grab a stat here too, because I think it's really important. So when those first hit the market from 2020, and we looked at through to the end of 22, we saw that their strength quintupled. That's kind of hard to even get your head around. That they became much, much more cheaper, and that they became huge in size. In fact, some of the products by the end of 2022 were 29 the size of one Juul pod. And so, I mean, it's just sort of kind of, it's hard to wrap your head around that. I mean, that's really an important piece, that these e-cigarettes have tremendous capacity, and are being sold. And, if you make them bigger and stronger, they end up being cheaper and highly accessible. We've also seen, the rise of the ONPs, the oral nicotine products, and those pouches can vary incredibly by brand or even within a brand. They could be as low as 2 milligrams, but they could be as high as 50 milligrams. And you all may know from your own interactions with your friends and communities and campus that people often use more than one at a time. And so, I think helping young people really understand the strength of these products is incredibly important moving forward. So.
Absolutely. With so many external factors, like as you mentioned, social media, the tobacco industry, TV, trying to undermine the harmful impacts of nicotine, how can other organizations like this podcast help address the scientific truth behind tobacco?
Yeah, that's a great question too. Well, you can do things that other short form formats can't do as well. So I think it's great that we're talking today. And so, podcasts, other media platforms like this are really more long form. And because of that, you can engage in the complexity of the subject. And so I think that's really important, more nuance and frank discussions on what can be a complicated topic, if you will. The goal of, podcasts and other educational efforts really should be to rebut the false information, the false claims about these products, and offer more evidence-based information. And so that's what we're doing again today. And so, I think one of the most important things that we can all be doing is to, acknowledge that nicotine may seem appealing in many contexts, but also driving home what addiction actually looks like. And that's why I wanted to share those quotes from young people that we've served, because I think that it really drives home what it means to be addicted. I've talked to also older adults who've said, I struggled with all sorts of addictions, and I went through and became, sober and, battled some other addictions, and I still can't, get rid of the nicotine. And that is, a very common factor for people who come to our quit programs who really, want to be free from nicotine. Often, especially for older adults, they were addicted as teens. And, that's what the industry historically had done in terms of combustible cigarettes. And it's what we're afraid of, today in terms of, young people experimenting, using these highly appealing products, and then having to, figure out and find a course to actually quit. I think we also think that, elevating real stories from young people that can talk about that combination of science and lived experience is really important. And then we'll talk a little, before we end today, I will tell a little bit more about our quitting resources. For people that want to quit. It's important for audiences to hear that quitting is possible and that support exists. We see a lot of social media, obviously, that is out there putting false information or misleading information out there. And so one thing that we're trying to do at Truth, a big focus for us, is to harness the power of social media for good. And so we have a Quit Collective, which is a group of young people who are organically on their own quitting and talking about their quitting journey. And so we have people in the organization that find and connect with these young people and then offer them an opportunity to collaborate and provide them resources. We'll encourage them to become part of our EXPROGRAM and then, journey and talk about that through the course of their process of quitting, but really amplifying their stories on TikTok and all the other social media platforms, Instagram and others, has been really successful. So, social media certainly presents a lot of challenges for us. But, I think we also have the opportunity, and we're not the only ones doing this. Lots of other organizations and universities are looking at how they can harness content creators, perhaps provide some grounding in the evidence and the facts, and then let them, really reach their audiences in ways that I think are influential, in ways that we could never be in terms of adults speaking to young people.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really great point, because I think it's kind of interesting to see how we talked about social media promoting a negative or a positive view on nicotine addiction, and kind of flipping that same platform to then again share stories about what addiction can actually look like, and to bring that awareness to young adults as well, because that's the reality of the product that they are using.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you know, in all of this, because we still do public health messaging and we have a campaign, Outsmart Nicotine. We've got some newer content up. It's available. You know, it's placed and we've got eyeballs on it. And you know, we also have a YouTube channel. And so, you know, we do everything that we can. We have a huge dissemination machine at Truth Initiative because that's a big part of our mission is getting the messages out in the venues and the channels where they're going to be seen and understood. But I think in all of it, it's really about starting from a place of respect with young people. They don't want to be lectured to or shamed or talked down to. And so it's about really finding the things that they care about. In fact, with any media campaign, before we start, what we do is a survey of young people to find out what are the most important issues right now, what matters to you. And I don't have to state the obvious. There are a lot of issues right now bearing down hard on all of us. And so young people care about a lot of things. But what they do tell us is that they care about their mental and physical health. They care about relationships. They want to have control over their lives. And that autonomy and control is something that we can tap into in terms of really helping them think about quitting. And so, you know, we really start with where they're at and build campaigns around that in ways that we think are going to pull young people in and get awareness of our ads, get awareness of our programs. You know, I think that the other thing is that we've had a big focus on recently is normalizing quitting. And so, you know, young people haven't really talked about quitting. I think the field has done a disservice for a long time on young people. The idea like, well, they won't want to quit until they're ready to quit. Well, that has not proven true. We put together a highly effective, clinically proven digital program, and we've had, you know, an incredible response. Young people, as much as any other age group, when they get to that place, you know, they want to quit. I think really what we can do now is to really try to sort out in forums like this and other places that, you know, the idea and the messaging that they're hearing, well, this is clean nicotine, it's healthy, it's going to help you focus and concentrate. It's like, you know, a really big cup of coffee. Well, I'm going to say a few things to try to sort of break this down. Caffeine is not as addictive as nicotine. Nicotine has a much higher addiction liability than caffeine does. That's really important to remember that. Also, so sort of short-term benefits, focus, you know, ability to kind of get your work done and lock in. Those are very short-term effects. They may not be clinically meaningful, and they very quickly give way if somebody continues to use to addiction. And so now they need to take the product to alleviate those symptoms of withdrawal, which are irritability, you know, lack of focus, you know, stress, you know, people more and more turning to nicotine first thing in the morning. And so these are really critical aspects to think about and break down for young people in terms of getting the message out there. So, you know, the other thing too is just, again, around quitting. Quitting nicotine addiction or addressing your nicotine, it's not about a lack of willpower. And, you know, established smokers who've struggled over the years and then finally quit will talk about this. I mean, it takes incredible motivation, but it takes help. Some people can quit on their own. We all have a story. You know, my father was a, you know, hospital administrator, and when they discovered that cigarettes were not good for you, he quit in a day. My poor mother didn't quit in a day. And so, you know, it's like, it was really hard. She'd been, you know, smoking since she was a nursing student, so different time. But we know that people, their chances of successfully quitting and staying quit, and sometimes it takes more than one try. People need support tools, and, you know, they need the community around them to really help them understand and, you know, not give up on their quitting journey, because it is hard.
No, absolutely. If just now that we have this platform and we can talk about this, what is the biggest thing you would want college students to take away about, or just like to know about nicotine that they may not have learned in school?
Yeah. That's a great question, and we spent some time on this one because what a great opportunity. So I guess I would want every college student to know that nicotine addiction can happen faster than you expect, especially with products that are easy to use frequently and discreetly. And that's what these new products have in common. And they're marketed as such. You know, you can use these products when you can't smoke or when you can't vape. You can use an oral nicotine pouch. So I think that's really just an important point to head home. I remember, or hit home. I remember early on talking to one of my nieces in college, and she called up and she goes, "Do these things have nicotine in it? Because my friends are wondering why they can't stop." And, you know, again, I think things have changed. I think there's been more awareness around nicotine. But I think that interchange, that exchange that I had with my niece is such a good example of, you know, like they weren't expecting, you know, to then be, you know, so quickly addicted. I think also just hitting home that nicotine is not a reliable solution for stress, focus, or burnout. It can feel helpful in the moment, but it can create a cycle where the brain starts to rely on nicotine to feel normal and rely on and need even increasing levels of nicotine. And so that's, I think, an important point to drive home. Two more. You know, and this was so common, you know, when I was coming up. I only use it socially. I'll quit when I get a real job, or I'll quit when I have kids, or I'll quit, you know, at some sort of milestone. Many people don't realize they're becoming dependent until they notice the cravings, the irritability, the trouble concentrating. Again, those are all signs of withdrawal from nicotine. Again, you have people often using it first thing in the morning. And then again, I'm going to just take a second here to talk about quitting. I'd also want them to know that quitting is possible. They don't have to do it alone. We offer free, that's free, confidential support for all forms of nicotine, including vapes, cigarettes, and pouches through our EXPROGRAM. And anyone can text EXPROGRAM, all one word, all caps, EXPROGRAM, to 88709 to start their quitting journey, to just really quickly get enrolled in a program, to get that online digital support. And it's no accident that we have a digital intervention. That's where young people want the information. You know, again, the phone in your pocket, it's 24/7 content, but it's also, you know, 24/7 help. And so I think those are the most important things in terms of understanding the product landscape and the marketing tactics that young people are exposed to right now.
Just one quick follow-up question. I wanted to ask if you had any advice for students that may be peer pressured into using nicotine in social environments, or if there's anything that you would say to them.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, you know, I think some of our prevention messaging in the past is still relevant today. You know, truth in the beginning, we're over 25 years we've been around as an organization, really focused on cigarettes, and then we quickly switched to vaping. And it was about helping young people understand the risks of these products and the risks of nicotine exposure. And so, you know, arming young people with, you know, strong messages to combat peer pressure. We do have a curriculum that we have provided to schools, and they have used this to educate students. And I think that there's some strong messages in that vaping curriculum. And so maybe that's one thing that we could follow up with you, just to pull some nice, concise, you know, messaging and framing around, you know, being in a situation where somebody, you know, is peer pressuring. And of course, young people today are faced with a lot of peer pressure, not just around vaping and nicotine and other tobacco products, but also around cannabis as well. And so, you know, we are sort of evolving as an organization and taking a look at that because, again, on the dual use side, it's not just dual use of tobacco and nicotine products. It also can be dual use of cannabis or THC and nicotine. And so our curriculum has evolved a bit in that regard as well, to acknowledge that. And so those messages to help young people in the situation, in the moment. It's also baked into our quitting program too, because we understand that people if they want to quit, they start a quitting process, but they're still surrounded by the same friends and the environments and the temptations. And so there's lots of messages about if you're in the process of quitting, here's some support, here's some, tips for how to avoid, how to react or how to avoid that situation. And so, that's really an important piece. The other thing that, just to touch a little bit more on cannabis, is that as we see these products evolved, and I started off by talking about the rapidly evolving landscape of these products. So we had, Juul, and then we had disposables. Now we have smart e-cigarettes that are disposable devices, but they've got high resolution screens, Bluetooth capacity. They'll tell you if your battery's running low or if you need more nicotine juice. And there's even games built into that. And so, we sort of look at, the whole lived experience for young people. It's not just tobacco and nicotine. It's also THC and other, influences in their life, the influences of social media, online gambling, of course, has, become something of concern as well. And so, again, in all of this, I think looking at the whole person and that lived experience is incredibly important.
Do you have any final words for our listeners as we wrap up?
Yeah, I think I do. Again, thank you. So what is truth going to do? What are we doing in this field and world that we live in? So, I think as I started us off, we are really focused on trying to keep pace with the rapidly changing nicotine marketplace. So my research team, I help lead and work with an incredibly talented team of researchers. We'll continue to monitor new products, their marketing, their design, their nicotine levels. I really think, helping young people understand the level of nicotine and the dangers of dependence. We'll look again at patterns of youth and young adult use as they start to change. Currently, we're seeing use of oral nicotine products is relatively low, but we are seeing it increase, especially in young adults. And that dual use factor continues to be important. For us at Truth, policy and enforcement remain critical. So you may be saying to yourselves, well, why hasn't somebody taken efforts to restrict the sale of these or get some of these products off the market? And I will say that there have been efforts. The FDA, the Center for Tobacco Products in the FDA, regulates these products. And to date, they've only approved 45 e-cigarettes for sale, legal sale in the U.S. And a handful of oral nicotine products have just now been approved for sale. They're not approved to sell or promote as cessation. They have to disclose, that they have nicotine, that nicotine is an addictive product, but there's a very limited number. But if you match that against the reality of going to a convenience store in many places in the U.S., you'll see an easily accessible, buffet, if you will, of highly, attractive, appealing e-cigarettes. And so the FDA is doing their job, but states and localities, including the great state of California, have taken efforts to restrict the sale of these flavored tobacco products, still allowing some tobacco-flavored e-cigarettes for adults who wish to use them to quit smoking, to quit combustibles, but recognizing that the flavors really present problems for their community. And so what we've seen is, great success in California, Massachusetts, and other states. It's not perfect. There still are products that are getting through, but it's gained a lot of attention. And some states haven't passed it, but local communities can. Local city council can approve a sales restriction in their community. Again, this is because they understand the dangers to young people, because they understand, just the implications of, getting young people addicted at an early age. And so, I think that for us, policy and enforcement and regulation remain critical. Quitting support needs to be part of that solution. And so, at the end of the day, we remain focused on our vision, which is to prevent a new generation from facing lifelong tobacco addiction. We'll continue to do that through strong research, effective public education, working to advance responsible media and entertainment practices, which you mentioned earlier, so important, policy action and enforcement, and again, providing free and accessible quitting support for anyone who needs it.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking about your experience, about the importance of understanding the implications of nicotine and the implications that social media and television has on our perception of nicotine as well. I think we had a great conversation. I learned a lot, and I think there's a lot of key points here for our peers as well. Shia, if there's anything else you want to add.
No, that was about it. Thank you so much for your responses. Definitely covered a lot and definitely gave us a lot to think about. I would say, or actually, no, I think that wraps up pretty much all of our questions.
Great. Well, I just want to say thank you again for the opportunity to join your podcast. This has been time super well spent. And, my team can follow up if there's any additional resources. We'll get some of the prevention messaging out to you. I think that would be helpful to include on your site as well. But, we will want to continue to be a resource for you. And I just wish you both luck in your college careers and your futures.
As always, if you're interested in learning more about translational addiction science, follow us on Instagram at Translational Addiction Podcast for updates. And feel free to check out the infographics and papers on the Loftyport Lab website linked in the show notes below. Truth Initiative also offers free resources for individuals and educators. The EXPROGRAM provides personalized support for anyone looking to quit vaping, smoking, nicotine pouches, or other tobacco nicotine products. They also offer Vaping, Know the Truth, a free digital curriculum that helps middle and high school students understand the risks of nicotine addiction and make informed choices. You can find more information about both resources, including how to access them, in the episode description and show notes. If you or someone you know is struggling with addiction, you are not alone. Please contact your healthcare provider or refer to the resources linked in the show notes. The Translational Addiction Podcast is a production of the Loftyport Lab at UC Irvine, exploring how we can better understand addiction and develop effective treatments. See you next time, and thank you for listening.